It's a great privilege to be called to make my maiden speech in this most important of debates, and I congratulate many others who've made outstanding maiden speeches today as well. Our communities have been deeply enhanced by immigration, be it Irish Catholics across the constituency or Muslims from Indian Gujarat or Pakistan, principally from Kashmir. And whilst we celebrate our diversity, the thing that surprises me time and time again as I travel around the constituency is that we are far more united and have far more in common than that which divides us. And many businesses in Yorkshire also want the security and stability of Britain's continued membership of the European Union, a cause I look forward to passionately championing in this place and elsewhere.
Jo Cox was a Member of Parliament for the UK Labour Party and a mother of 2 young children. She was reported to have been assassinated on the 16th of June 2016 in broad daylight in front of many witnesses in the village of Birstall in Yorkshire outside a public library 6 days before her 42nd birthday. I think it's true to say that most people in the UK had never heard of Jo Cox before she was killed. I certainly hadn't. She had only been an MP for just over a year, gaining her seat in the May 2015 general election. Cox was born in the town she represented and from a young age was strong academically, securing a place at Cambridge University to study politics. After university, she worked as a political advisor to Labour MP Joan Whalley, then spent 2 years as an assistant to European Member of Parliament Glenys Kinnock. A quote from Jo Cox's husband's book reads, "In 1998, Jo went to work for Britain in Europe, a new organisation set up to prepare for a possible referendum on the single currency. So as early as 98, when she was just 24 years old, she was involved in politics connecting Britain and Europe." She went on to work in top positions for the charity Oxfam, located in various places such as Brussels and New York up to 2009. After this, she worked as an advisor to Sarah Brown, wife of the then Prime Minister. I think we need to consider here that because she studied at Cambridge and was advising the Prime Minister's wife at the age of 35 and held a high position in Oxfam, it is possible she was a security service asset. There is a whole range of other issues that Jo Cox was pushing, which I will not go into here. Mark Windows has described Jo Cox and her husband Brendan as change agents working for globalist interests, whose role is to destroy national sovereignty. After becoming an MP in 2015, she was probably most noted for her stance on the Syrian and Palestinian-Israeli conflicts. At the time of her reported death, she was campaigning in the UK's Brexit referendum and speaking strongly in favour for Britain to remain in the European Union. But just 1 week before the 2016 referendum, an assailant who had been waiting for her to arrive outside the local library ran towards her car and just after she got out is alleged to have shot her 3 times and in between the shots stabbed her very efficiently 15 times while she was lying on the ground. The perpetrator was witnessed being confronted by an elderly man who tried to defend Cox but was quickly deterred by the attacker. The perpetrator calmly left the scene, captured on CCTV. Walking briskly, he made a successful escape down a side street. Out of the 20 or more witnesses, nobody recognised him. He was wearing a white baseball cap, was of medium build, had a greyish goatee beard, and was wearing a dark blue suit-type jacket. 35 minutes later, 1 mile away from where the murder occurred, police arrested a man wearing a black baseball cap and a grey t-shirt. The man was local gardener Tommy Mair, who was 52 years old. He is now serving a life sentence as a Category A prisoner, currently in Franklin Jail in County Durham in the north of England. Much has been written about Mair in the UK's mainstream media, in particular about his political views and affiliations, and his mental health issues. These articles across the board contain woeful inaccuracies about his beliefs and his character. I have spoken to several people who knew him well, some of whom are close personal friends. None of them report Tommy ever expressing far-right or extremist political beliefs. He was a modest, quiet, shy man who loved animals, especially cats. I have actually met Tommy's cat Felix, who he affectionately named due to its likeness to the famous black and white cat featured in cat food commercials. Felix is now living with one of Tommy's close friends. I spoke to one woman who knew him as a child, and she commented that when she first met him, somebody remarked, "He's a very quiet boy." She was then told by an adult, "Yes, but he's a lovely boy," meaning he was kind and considerate and by all accounts intelligent. At the time of the murder, like many middle-aged men in such a community, Tommy did not have permanent employment, but would make small amounts of cash doing gardening work for people around the estate where he lived. Tommy lived alone, had never married, and in previous years did a lot of voluntary work in the community.
Even though I've seen it on the television, even though I've spoken to several people, I cannot believe it's happened. That he did it, of all people. Very mild-mannered man, very quiet man. He volunteers. He moved here when he was 8 years old, approximately 8 years old, and lived with his grandparents who lived there. He's lived by himself since his grandparents died. But somebody said to me that somebody had told him he was a loner. Well, that's far from the truth. Far from the truth. I mean, a loner, to me, as far as I'm concerned, is somebody that avoids people, won't do eye contact, and more of a recluse.
And he wasn't like that?
Not in the least, no. He was a quiet man that kept to himself, but he did, when I first moved back, he did about 2 or 3 days in Dewsbury teaching, I think, the Muslims, the Asians, to do as English as a second language. He's worked as a volunteer down in Oakwell Hall, where he learned his gardening, and he loved his gardening. And he was a receptionist at Pathfinders, which is in Mirfield, community care officers. So I know, I mean, he went out and about, and he wanted to help people.
So he wasn't a loner?
No, by no means. He didn't initiate conversations with strangers, and he possibly didn't initiate conversations with people he knew little, but we had many a conversation, and he's helped me tremendously since I moved back. We never spoke about politics, we never spoke about what was happening in the world. We spoke about our little corner and our day-to-day activities and just what was happening in the community. He's never been racist, never had a racist comment. I've never seen him angry. I've never heard him swear. Even though he's been aggravated at times by the local children, they've never managed to make him cross. A more mild-mannered man you couldn't wish to meet. Okay, he may not have come over as friendly, but if you weren't his friend, he wouldn't have done, would he? Let's face it. I mean, we were neighbourly, we never went in each other's house, but we did things for each other. He did far more for me than I did for him. When my lawnmower broke, I came home one day and he mowed the lawn. I didn't ask him to do it, he'd just done it, you know. He was a man of routine. He had certain days, as far as I was aware, he had 3 days or part days, 1 full day and 2 part days doing the teaching. He did garden for locals. He did garden for the council, a councillor that lived around the corner. He visited his mum to do jobs for her, and he took her shopping one day a week. He never went out on an evening, so I don't know where he met all these people. I know he was on the computer. I asked him once what his hobbies were, and other than his gardening, he says, well, I go on the computer, and he says, I watch the television. Yeah.
So he never expressed anything about, South Africa, some right-wing magazine. Do you have any idea where he would have gone?
After hearing news that Tommy had been accused of a murder, his brother Scott said, I am struggling to believe what has happened. My brother is not violent and is not all that political. I don't even know who he votes for. He has a history of mental illness, but he has had help. His half-brother Dwayne said he volunteered at a special school several times a week and had never expressed racist or even strong political views. If we go back 18 years when Tommy Mair was 34, a letter allegedly written by him has been made public, in which he writes to a pro-apartheid supporter in South Africa and speaks about his hopes of the white race prevailing in Britain and in South Africa. If we move forward 8 years to 2006, there was evidence discovered on a website which suggests that a magazine called SA Patriot was being sent to Tommy Mair in Birstall, but was being returned to the publishers unopened. Mainstream media have tried to exaggerate this evidence beyond reasonable argument. To me, it looks like his interest in such politics diminished as he got older. In my independent investigation into the murder of Joe Cox, I have visited Birstall several times, spoken to many witnesses, unearthed my own evidence, studied publicly available evidence, and consulted with a number of other researchers who have looked into the case themselves and attended the trial. In previous investigative documentaries, I have always presented evidence to the viewer first, before going on to explain conclusions or theories. In this film, I will present all the evidence to back up my findings, but I am going to depart from the usual sequence in order to make the film easier to follow. I think it's important for you to know about the following 5 points up front, which will make the evidence easier to explain. Having spent months investigating, I am convinced the official story is a lie, and that Thomas Mair played no part in the murder of Joe Cox. As I said, all the evidence to demonstrate why I hold this belief will be presented a little later in the film. I can hear some people rejecting this statement out of hand, purely because you cannot see a reason why an organised group or a faction of the state would contrive such a complicated plot to remove a seemingly harmless person like Joe Cox. I will discuss the possible motive at the very end of the film. I am convinced that a certain group did have their own plausible motive for making Joe Cox disappear. But for now, we will stick to what happened in Birstall on the 16th of June 2016. The apparent murder of Joe Cox was a fairly well organised plot, planned and executed by the senior detectives who were supposedly or supposed to be running the investigation into her murder. These detectives were probably under instruction from a higher authority, but that, as I said, we will come to later. The plot involved using a military hitman dressed to look like Thomas Mair to be seen to execute Joe Cox in broad daylight outside the library in Birstall town centre. The plot also involved contriving a situation where it was made to look as though Thomas Mair had killed Joe Cox. The 5 points I want to present are as follows. What was meant to happen? In other words, what was the original plan for the operation? What went wrong with the operation? What actually happened during the operation? How did the operation change? And finally, what was reported by the media? Once I've highlighted these 5 points, I will then present evidence, witness accounts and interviews to explain them fully. So please bear with me as I set out these 5 points, then afterwards evidence will follow which supports them. Where there are gaps in the evidence, a small amount of what follows is based on my own intuition. If new evidence comes to light which clarifies any of these points after the film has aired, I am happy to modify the film at a future date. Point 1. What was meant to happen? The operation would have been planned days or even weeks in advance. A person in the community would be selected based on certain criteria to be used as a patsy for Joe Cox's apparent murder. A patsy is someone who takes the blame or is framed for a crime but actually plays no part in it. The criteria would include being a fairly isolated individual without a strong social network of people to back them up. A local male who always wears a baseball cap when going about his business would be desirable, because it means his face would be obscured from CCTV cameras, making him an easy person to impersonate. A non-car driver who usually chooses to walk would also be desirable. The plan would be to determine in advance a known time and location where Joe Cox, the target, would be. An obvious choice for this would be when she arrives at her advice surgery, which is at a known place and it's on a specific day and at a specific time. Once the time and place for the murder was selected and a patsy chosen, a suitable hitman would be selected from a military regiment who is of similar age and stature to the chosen patsy. Here's a map of Birstall. I've marked the relevant locations in purple. Tommy May's house was about a mile walk from Birstall Library, where the attack occurred at 12:52 p.m. This is the house and garden on John Nelson Close, where the perpetrator headed immediately after the murder. And this is Rysdale Avenue, where a suspect was arrested. On the day of the operation, the plan would be to manoeuvre the patsy, Thomas May, to a location not far from the chosen murder scene, which was easily accessible but isolated and not overlooked. This would need to be done sometime before the assassination event, in this case 45 minutes before. Thomas May was a local gardener, and I suspect the plan was for one of the senior detectives or an intermediary to ask Tommy, via his mobile phone, to do gardening work at a specific secluded property at the end of a cul-de-sac on John Nelson Close, which is 3 minutes' walk from the planned murder scene. This is the garden where the official story claims the perpetrator went to immediately after the murder, leaving various belongings in the overgrown back garden. One of the detectives stated in a BBC documentary that this garden was overgrown. In other words, it needed work. I have also learned from one of the residents of John Nelson Close this property was often left empty. I think this is an important fact, suggesting the property may have been empty on the 16th of June. It certainly appeared empty when I knocked on the door. I got no reply. The plan would have been for Tommy May to arrive at the property of the overgrown garden on John Nelson Close at 12 noon, 45 minutes before the planned murder. On his way there, he would have been under observation by an operative who would be hiding in the grounds of the local chapel. May would have been picked out coming down Huddersfield Road, turning left onto Brookroyd Lane and then into John Nelson Close. It was reported in the Daily Mirror that a schoolgirl saw a man with binoculars lying down between two gravestones in the grounds near the chapel, which I will cover later. This would be a perfect vantage point for such an operative. Once Tommy May was in position at the garden, the operative hiding in the grounds near the chapel would then report back to the operation. Tommy starts his gardening job in the secluded back garden. Meanwhile, the military hitman, carrying a similar bag to the patsy and wearing the same colour baseball cap, would be placed in Birstall town centre, waiting for Joe Cox to arrive. Once she arrives, the hitman would be seen executing the target, then immediately walk calmly towards the property on John Nelson Close, where Tommy May is in position. Witnesses described what they saw as being cold and carried out with precision. When the perpetrator reaches John Nelson Close, he would enter the secluded garden, kill Tommy May with the same firearm, place the firearm next to Tommy May's dead body, thus fabricating a suicide. At this point, an entourage of armed response and other vehicles would arrive at the property, sealing off the house and garden from the public and allowing the military hitman to disappear into the safety of an unmarked police car. Items would be planted next to Tommy Mare's body, such as clothing or weapons used in the attack. It would then appear that Tommy Mare was the perpetrator and had committed suicide rather than face the consequences of his actions. Killing the patsy would have been an important requirement of this operation because it means there would be no trial. Only an inquest would be needed, which would not address the awkward question of whether Tommy Mare was guilty. It would just be assumed by everyone that he was. So this is what I suspect was meant to happen. Let's now look at what went wrong with this operation. Point 2. What went wrong? I believe there are two things that went wrong with the plan I have just outlined. As many of you will know, Tommy Mare was not killed and is currently serving life in Franklin Prison. The first thing that went wrong is that due to previous observations on Mare by the operation, they believed he would be wearing his usual white baseball cap to go to the gardening job. For this reason, the hitman was fitted with a similar looking white cap as we saw on most of the CCTV. However, that day when Tommy left his home at about 11:40 a.m, he chose to wear his black cap before heading to the garden on John Nelson Close. So the man seen fleeing the murder scene is wearing a white baseball cap, but the man seen being arrested, Tommy Mare, was wearing a black one. Whoops, that was the first thing that went wrong with the operation. The perpetrator looked different to the man that was arrested. The second thing I suspect that went wrong is that for some reason they could not execute Tommy Mare in the secluded garden at John Nelson Close. The most likely explanation for this is that Tommy Mare was not at the garden in John Nelson Close, where they expected him to be at around 12:57 p.m. Point 3. What actually happened? Once they realised they could not execute their patsy at the preferred location in John Nelson Close, they picked up the military hitman in an unmarked black police car. They then had to find a way to manoeuvre the patsy to another suitable location, another cul-de-sac where he could either be killed or arrested. I suspect they had lost observation on him just after the murder and did not know his exact location, so attempted to contact him by mobile phone. If this is what happened, I have reason to believe, due to the timing of the events, it took about 15 minutes for him to answer, or he was about 15 minutes away from John Nelson Close. Once he answered the phone, he was asked by one of the senior officers who had arranged the original gardening job to go to another location for some made-up reason. This location was another cul-de-sac at a different part of Birstall, Rysdale Avenue. Tommy Mare, having no idea that a murder had taken place 20 minutes earlier on Market Street, agrees to this and heads towards Rysdale Avenue as instructed. On his way there, he is seen on Leeds Road by two unarmed officers in a police car, who then follow him into Rysdale Avenue cul-de-sac. They then rugby tackle him to the ground and arrest him at 1:29 p.m. Shortly after the arrest, an entourage of armed police vehicles and unmarked vehicles arrive all at once in a convoy, including the unmarked car carrying the military hitman. The military hitman, who was seen to kill Joe Cox 40 minutes earlier, gets out of the unmarked police car and goes over to Tommy Mare just to check that the two unarmed officers who might not have been part of the operation have arrested the correct man, the patsy called Tommy Mare. After all, the hitman would know who he is supposed to be impersonating. Point 4. How did the operation change? I've already suggested one change, which was to manoeuvre the patsy to another cul-de-sac where he could be apprehended. But when Tommy Mare got to this second cul-de-sac at Rysdale Avenue, residents were watching him and started filming the events after the first police car arrived. So the operation was unable to shoot Tommy Mare because they wouldn't have been able to claim it was suicide. Instead of killing the patsy, they arrested him and took him into custody. Once they did this, they had a problem on their hands. If they allowed him proper legal representation and a trial, he would be able to present an alibi and show evidence where he was during the time of the murder. Remember, those running this operation have orchestrated the apparent murder of Joe Cox. They are not acting as normal police officers, therefore they would not want to allow Mair any proper legal representation. They were faced with two options. The first would be to murder Tommy Mair in custody. The second would be to stage a phony police interview and trial using an actor in the place of Tommy Mair. Killing Tommy Mair in custody would put the spotlight on the investigation and present numerous more problems. To stage a trial, they would need to use an actor. You might think this is impossible, but as I will show, this is what the evidence suggests happened, which I will come on to. They would need a corrupt judge, a corrupt defence lawyer, and an actor to play the part of Tommy Mair. If the operation was being run by the state, these things would not be difficult to arrange. What about Tommy Mair's family? Surely they would realise it was not Tommy Mair on trial. Well, none of Tommy Mair's family attended the trial because they were told by authorities they were not allowed to go. This is an astonishing fact gleaned when researcher Mark Connellan's partner spoke to Tommy Mair's brother, Dwayne St. Louis.
So in August 2018, me and my partner decided to travel up to Birstall to speak to Tommy Mair's mother, because hadn't really heard anything from Tommy Mair since he'd been convicted. So, you know, there's no way of getting any information or know whether it was him who was involved. So we travelled up there to try and ask his mother if she'd visited him in prison and, you know, anything had been discussed. Unfortunately, she didn't want to talk. So at the time when we was coming away, her son showed up, Dwayne. My partner thought, I need to try and get a question in, and she asked him if he'd attended the court case, and he comes straight back and says, no, we weren't allowed.
It is my belief that the real Tommy Mair was not present at his own trial and has not had any proper legal representation. After they ran their fraudulent trial with an actor playing the part of Tommy Mair, the real Tommy Mair was sent to prison for life for a crime he played no part in. Point 5. What was reported in the media? The media, as always, chose to report whatever the police told them. That Tommy Mair, a cat lover with no history of violence and no knowledge or history of using weapons, had targeted Cox, fled the scene, then somehow ended up being arrested on Rysdale Avenue about a mile away. The media did what they were told and reported the police version of events without asking any questions. How did the media explain that the alleged killer on Market Street was wearing different clothes to the man arrested a mile away on Rysdale Avenue? This was all dealt with by an alleged phone call presented at the dubious trial, which it is claimed was made shortly after the murder by eyewitness and plumber Darren Playford, who reported seeing the perpetrator wearing a white cap, then reported seeing the perpetrator disappear behind the Vaults pub, and then reported seeing the perpetrator resurface again wearing a black cap and grey t-shirt. I'll go into that evidence later in the film. Now that you understand what most likely happened, I am going to go through all of the most pertinent evidence I have been able to find, some of which is already in the public domain, some of which is revealed in this film for the first time. You can decide for yourself whether you think this evidence agrees with the points I... Let's now go through the evidence, starting with Tommy Mair's movements on the 15th and 16th of June 2016. I'm going to show you all the CCTV footage I have been able to find in order to trace his path. This video clip showing Tommy Mair entering the library the day before the murder is widely believed to be the real Tommy Mair. I have shown it to locals who knew him well. Some say it is definitely him. Another states it is very likely to be him. Before we go through every piece of CCTV I've been able to find from the 16th of June, we are going to compare this clip from the 15th of June with the CCTV footage showing the perpetrator fleeing the scene immediately after the murder. Damon is a martial arts expert and has spent decades analysing the way people move, their posture and their gait.
When you're trying to teach somebody position and movement, you have to study the whole of their body language, and the more you do, the more experienced you become in seeing how you need to recorrect people's postures, people's movements, people's turns, ups, downs, backwards, forwards, sideways. And over the years, you get to notice people's feet movements and hand movements. Sometimes they've got a drop shoulder. Sometimes they've got a slightly obscure neck. Sometimes their feet are inverted. Sometimes their feet are splayed out like so. They've got different walking patterns. And you learn this over the years. You learn different styles of the way that people move and walk. If we go to the footage of Tommy walking into the library, it's actually very clear footage, which is good, and you can see Tommy's walking pattern. Tommy brings his foot, or the front part of his foot, up at almost a 45-degree angle. So it's quite a high front stride. Due to the pattern of walking, the back part of the heels on his boots would probably be worn down because he throws the front foot up like that. So the heel hits the ground. That's quite a distinct walk. And also when Tommy is walking out of the library, you see his walking pattern from behind. And as he crosses the road, you can quite clearly see in every stride the front of the foot comes up to this level. There's no splaying of the feet outwards, or there's no inversion of the feet inwards. This is why I feel that this is very important evidence. Tommy has got a very distinct way of walking, and you will see, especially after the alleged shooting, as he's walking away, it's a totally different walking pattern. Now, how I've studied Tommy's walking pattern and this guy's walking pattern, they're totally different. This guy walks with what's known as being pigeon-toed. Okay, his feet are inverted as he walks. I also notice a slight limp from his left, okay, which is a very, very important point, because in some of the other footage, there's also a very similar walking pattern, and there's also this slight left limp.
From Damon's observations, it is very likely that the man seen fleeing the murder scene on Market Street is not Tommy Mair. Let's go through Tommy Mair's alleged movements that day, and I will highlight where the footage was taken using this map. None of the CCTV images show a clear view of the face, but it is possible using other factors, such as the walking style, to determine whether the person in each clip is likely to be Tommy Mair or somebody else. The official narrative says he left his house at 9:40 a.m. that morning and headed towards Dark Lane. A person is caught on CCTV cameras from this property on the corner of Lowood Lane. We see the figure crossing the road, but there's no reason why the person would have been on the other side of the road if they'd walked from Tommy Mair's house.
I see a slight inversion in the walk. I can't see it perfectly clear because it's at a side angle. Okay, so I've stilled it there, and you can clearly see that the guy walks with an inverted stride.
Right.
Okay, because both of his feet are turned in there. So I believe that this chap isn't Tommy.
Based on Damon's observations, I would say it is unlikely that this is Tommy Mair. Further on Dark Lane, a figure is captured by a CCTV system from Master Cars.
It doesn't look like the stride of Tommy Myers. Okay, I can see a very slight limp, I would say.
Even though it's shot at such a distance, that one.
Yeah, Tommy walks in a totally different pattern. So if Tommy was walking down that street, okay, you would be able to see it straight away. But I can't verify that because as you've just stated, it is at a distance.
Again, I cannot be sure this is Tommy Mair. This one goes down as uncertain. Next, we can see a figure on Gelderd Road, the shot being so far away we can't be certain who it is. As we see, the figure then appears to walk along Gelderd Road away from Birstall town centre. Tommy was a well-organised person. If he was intending to go this way to the retail park as claimed, he would surely have taken this path. The figure we see seems indecisive in his route. The police claim that he walked all the way to W.H. Smith's on a busy retail park. Here is the next CCTV clip allegedly showing him walking along Gelderd Road. It is interesting that we see water on this camera, but on that day, the 16th, there was no rain in the morning. Again, we cannot positively identify Mair in either of these sequences. Next, we see footage from the retail park showing a tiny speck in the distance, which could be anyone. The police also released still images from W.H. Smith's cameras purporting to be of Tommy Mair inside the shop. I have shown these stills to two people who knew him very well, and they both state this is definitely not Tommy Mair. The shape of the face is different. We note also the shirt is different to the plain grey t-shirt worn in the arrest video. The police claim that the man in these images, 3 hours before the attack, is wearing two baseball caps, a light-coloured one on top of a black-coloured one. I suggest they have said this in order to prop up their fairy story about how, after the man in the white cap killed Joe Cox, he removed the white cap, which he was wearing on top of a black baseball cap, which conveniently explains why the man they arrested wore a different cap to the alleged killer seen on CCTV. These images do not show Tommy Mair. The police allege Mair then returns to his house along the same route. A figure is captured again by two cameras on the property at the end of Lowood Lane. It looks like the same person that walked past earlier in the other direction, and Damon draws the same conclusion that this is unlikely to be Tommy Mair. The official story then claims he went back to his house for a period where he got changed and set off back in the same direction as before at the official time of 11:30 a.m. Here is the person walking back again wearing a different jacket. This is probably the same person as in the previous two clips, and again Damon concludes this is probably not Tommy Mair. I managed to track down two witnesses who are close neighbours of Tommy and saw the real Tommy Mair leaving his house that morning at around 11:40 a.m, not 11:30 a.m. as stated in the official story. I also managed to speak to just now Emma Cook and Kathleen Cook. Now they were the ones who live on Lowood Lane, just a few doors down from Thomas Mair, and they saw Thomas Mair leaving his house that morning. So from them I've established the approximate time. Obviously it's a few years ago, but they seem to think it was before 12 o'clock, but after 11:30, because the daughter was picking her daughter up from nursery. At that time it would have been before 12 o'clock. And I asked both of them independently, because they don't live in the same house, I asked them what was the colour of the cap, and neither of them can remember what colour the baseball cap was. They were both racking their brains, but they couldn't. The mother seemed to think he was wearing a non-suit jacket, coat with a hood. I went back and spoke to them again, and they confirmed he definitely was not wearing a suit jacket when he left at around 11:40 a.m. They have never seen him wear a suit jacket before, and if they had seen him in one, they would have remarked on it because it would have been completely out of character. It would have been a talking point. Due to the different walk identified by Damon and the fact that he was not wearing a suit jacket when he left the house, I am confident this is not Tommy Mair on Lowood Lane. I decided to knock on the door of the house which hosts these cameras, just to ask exactly when the police took the footage away. I'm on Lowood Road, and I've just spoken to the guy who lives in the end house, who has a CCTV system that the police used and was featured in the BBC documentary. So I asked him, when did the police come to get the CCTV footage? He said it was about a week after the murder. He said that they came with a USB stick, they took the footage, and that was it. I asked him if he still had a copy. He said no, it overwrites it. I asked him if he reviewed the footage At the time, he said no, he didn't, so he doesn't have a copy of it. So what do I make of this evidence? It seems likely to me that the operation has instructed their military hitman to walk past these various cameras so they are consistent with the Market Street video. We now see another image shot at distance on Gelderd Road. I think you can make out the dark blue suit type jacket in this clip, so for the reasons given earlier, this is probably not Tommy Mair. Next, we see the figure further down Gelderd Road walking past Birstall Tyre Centre. We can identify the same suit jacket and slight limp, so again, it's probably not Tommy Mair. As I stated earlier, I do think the real Tommy Mair walked down Gelderd Road towards Birstall that day, but probably shortly before the man we see in these images. And I suspect Tommy turned left at these traffic lights onto Brookroyd Lane, heading toward John Nelson Close. As I said earlier, he was probably being observed from this chapel on his way down. This Daily Mirror article states, Joe Cox shooting, schoolgirl saw man with binoculars hiding in graveyard as police hunted for suspect. He was lying down on the floor between two graves. He was wearing a black hoodie and he had binoculars. He was only about 50 metres away. The article is claiming this man was seen shortly after the shooting, but we don't know how long he had been there. So that's the corner of Huddersfield Road and Brookroyd Lane, and this is the chapel. The two gravestones. I suspect this is where the operative was with his binoculars, lying on the ground next to these two gravestones. This is an ideal spot on this corner to see Huddersfield Road, so Tommy Mair would have arrived from his house into the village via Huddersfield Road, this road running along here. Also, he's got visibility of the corner of Huddersfield Road and Brookroyd Lane, and that's where the perpetrator walked to go into John Nelson Close. So if he was to stand at this corner here, he would be able to see all of that activity. So when the schoolgirl saw him lying down between these two gravestones, he's probably just been lying low, waiting for instructions from the operation.